To hell with StreamYards. It's a freaking nuisance. That's what it is. Alright. Let me get to my place. 12. Alright, here we go. Chapter 13. Titled Find a Stream in the Wasteland. Day 3, noon, Granite Rapids. Euphoric might be the word that describes how we felt. Finally reaching the mighty greenish blue, rip-snorting, roaring, chilly as all get out Colorado River. Water! All the water you'd ever want. I wanted to drink it, filtered or not, but Dad told me to wait as he pulled out the pump. Within a few minutes, we had cold, fresh water in our bottles. I chugged half of mine and asked for more. Slow down, you're going to get a bellyache. 48 hours ago, I was bent over by my massive backpack, full of nerves on my shaky legs. So miserable, I was contemplating flinging myself off a ledge. Now, after a 4,300-foot descent down 13 miles, I posed for a picture a foot off the river's edge, in front of some wicked white water rapids. Standing tall, legs firm, grinning ear to ear. My backpack, flung off yards back, was forgotten. After getting my waters filled, I went back and grabbed my pack, stepping over large river rocks to reach our sandy campsite, where I had big plans to plant my rear for the remainder of the day. We passed by a few tents and were soon greeted by a handful of hikers. One of the men, in his early 20s, said, "You must be the man hiking with his 2 young sons and the large winter weight packs we heard about." How had they heard of us? It was like our legend of stupidity preceded us. He said 2 young sons. She's a chick. I took off my sunglasses and looked the guy hard in the eyes. "I'm a girl," I said with a smirk. "Oh, that you are. Nice to meet you." "What do you mean, winter weight packs?" I asked, although I thought I already knew the answer. The group of seasoned hikers explained. "In the warm months in the canyon, you can manage well with lightweight clothing and basic necessities. You want to keep your pack weight down as much as possible so you can carry more water." I ran through a mental list of unnecessary items I'd lugged around for 2 days and had yet to use, including jeans, my purple KSU jacket, and a large KSU plastic mug, and not enough water. Not nearly enough. Dad was still talking to the group, but I moved on, setting up my pack up against a tamarisk, a small cedar tree set back in a long, narrow grove along the river. I tossed my mat down on the sand and took off my boots and socks. Adie and Dad joined me. Adie pulled his Chicago Bulls cap over his eyes and quickly fell asleep, and Dad soon followed. I picked up the red and black paperback, heavy on crime, that I'd thrown last minute into my pack but drifted off to sleep too. A few hours later, we were woken by a party of a dozen or so loud, happy men and women in 3 rafts. They rammed their rubber boats on the sandy shore, and the guides were nimbly jumping out, grabbing ropes, tying the boats off to the trees. I was quite taken with these odd specimens, wearing bright-colored life vests, some in hard helmets, most scantily clad. The guides inquired after us, and we told them about the last 2 grueling days. After looking over Dad, they mentioned he looked pale and offered him a salt pill to help stave off growing dehydration, then offered us cold pineapple juice in cans and some of the fish tacos they cooked for their dinner. We gladly accepted. As the sun lowered for the third night, its remaining light falling on the massive brown and red walls surrounding us, I lay on the sand happy, my belly full of water and food, thankful for this day. My faith had been built with a firm foundation by my parents and my grandparents, Sunday after Sunday, at church as a child. It had taken terrible hits over the past 5 years, but now it was beginning to show me some hope. I'd been sure God had forsaken me, yet my pleas in this canyon for water, for shelter, for safety had all been answered. Had God not forsaken me? Was he hearing my prayers? Had he been with me this entire time? Maybe, just maybe, there was something to this whole God thing. With lots of living things scurrying around us due to the abundant water, I decided crashing in my tent sounded best for the night. I quickly set it up under the low-lying trees and snapped a glow stick so I could have some light to read by. Huge mistake. A gazillion bugs hit my tent in a flash. I heard Dad chuckling loudly outside, and I yelled to him through the flap I now refused to open. "What's so funny? Your tent is glowing like a gigantic lightning bug, and every insect for miles likes you a whole lot." Oh, heck. I quickly finished using the light and tucked it into my shoe, stewing at the man who was contentedly lying out in the sand in the cool air, watching the stars. Oh my goodness. Just amazing. This great dad. Day 4. The next morning, Dad told me sleeping out on the sand was one of the more magical nights of his life. Watching bats swoop above his head, catching bugs. I'd slept in fits, my tent too warm, but unwilling to sleep outside among the many river critters. After breakfast, we walked down to the boulder-strewn beach to watch the rafters as they shot the rapids. They paddled hard as soon as they put in, and I held my breath as each boat hit the churning water and lifted with a good number of yee-haws coming from the boats. Each made it over with reasonable ease and was quickly sent down stream and soon out of sight. Dad and I determined right then we would take a rafting trip through the canyon before he got any older. Dad wanted to make it up to Monument Creek before it got any warmer, concerned about the heat in the creek bed. AD and I wanted to stay on the river for the day and head up to our campsite at dusk, but Dad reminded us that if Brian were to come down, he would expect to find us there on day 4. It didn't seem worth the argument with Dad or the likely fallout, so we packed up and trekked 1.5 miles back through the same creek bed as yesterday. You can make out the rim from this camp, thousands of feet above us, way off the distance. There were likely people up there right now, sightseeing from atop of the abyss. It was hot on the platform, and I quickly sought shade. Dad told me before I wandered off that I needed to secure my pack. We had seen ground squirrels down at the river end here. Dad helped me rig up a rope over a tree branch, and we hung my pack high. Dad was pale, upright, and peeved. He seemed to want to spend the rest of his day in the awfully hot and smelly outhouse that was at camp. I'd stepped foot in it once, but turned right back around and went back to using the desert with the lizards. Trying to avoid colliding up against Dad, who was becoming more and more irritable, AD and I found refuge in a narrow, slick rock canyon. I intended to spend hours reading and napping with my feet in a cold stream, my back up against smooth rock. I was going to enjoy my day, whether Dad wanted to or not. When I got back to the camp late in the afternoon, I found a 2-inch hole in the side of my pack and the remains of my trail mix scattered on the ground. Dang rodents. At dinner, AD and I were trying to help, and I accidentally spilled a small amount of cooking fuel. Dad snapped at us both. Now look what you've done. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. It wasn't that much. You need to be more careful, Dad interrupted, overriding what I was trying to say, telling us how priceless the fuel was. It was common to have his mood switch on one of us kids, but I'd never seen him do that to any of my cousins. Dad always fought hard to be in control, not just his emotions or demeanor, but his whole body. He was careful about who got to see what side of him. He was almost always on excellent behavior in front of anyone who wasn't Mom, Brian, or me. But now he was losing a little bit of control and quickly boiling over. We somehow managed dinner under tight conditions and a darkening sky. Not long after, Dad and I laid out plastic to sleep on. It was way too hot for a tent, even with rodents around. AD set up a spot near some young hikers who had come into camp that afternoon. I think he had enough of Dad, and likely me too. Not long after laying down, I saw a flashlight bouncing around off in the distance, up above the steep switchbacks that led down to Monument Creek. My heart caught in my throat. Brian! I sat up and nudged Dad, pointing out the light to him. Look up there. Do you think it could be Brian? Can we go see? Help whoever it is? Dad looked out into the distance, but with his face and voice set firm, said, no, it's not safe. It's farther than you think. It would be suicide to go up there in the dark. Stay put. I got my small electric blue mag light out, stood up, and signaled SOS as best I could. 3 shorts, 3 longs, 3 shorts, twisting it to turn off and on and off. I didn't know how to signal anything else, and I thought it might catch the attention of whoever held the light. I thought maybe they were signaling back, but Dad said it was the person moving the light around. It was Brian. I knew it. My whole body knew it. I argued with my dad, almost in a panic. He wouldn't budge. It was like coming up against a stone wall, and I hated it for him. I hated him for it. He didn't need to be so cautious, so dang protective. That person might need help, but I knew it was Brian. The light faded, and Dad thought maybe the person had headed down toward the river. I lay down and rolled over in a huff. Tears came forth, and I wept as quietly as I could. God, Brian needs your help. Please help him safe. Please keep him safe. Please deliver him to us. With tears streaming down my face, I prayed for my brother or whomever the light belonged to, broken inside, my hard, stubborn heart cracking in two, my soul splitting open. I rolled back over and looked up at the Milky Way, laid out so perfectly, even better than it was 2 nights ago. All is calm, all is bright. God, you made this, didn't you? All of this. The stars, the rocks, the river, they belong to you, don't they? And I think they are as old as folks say, because I think you're infinite, like this immense place, but way, way beyond. At Michelle's funeral, it was spoken of many rooms and Jesus going to prepare a place for us and coming back to take us to be with him. Where in the heavens above was his home? Was there still room for me? Were Michelle and Grandpa, who believed in him, who loved his son, home? They knew God as their father. God had promised to never leave me nor forsake me, and he hadn't forsaken me. I had forsaken him. That cut right through me, leaving gaping agony to the bottom of my being. Would God want to talk to me after I'd walked away? Would God want anything to do with me after the way I treated him? God, forgive me for my doubts and all my wrong steps over the past years. I looked up at the stars overhead and made a deal with him. If he could get us out of this mess my dad had gotten us into, I would come back to the faith I'd lost and accept his son, Jesus Christ, as my Savior. I loved him, loved God. I would make it right. God, please help us get out of here. I will come back. I will do whatever it takes. Just get us out. A peace like I'd never known washed over me. I wiped my wet face with my sleeping bag and closed my eyes. Hope. It was beginning to spring forth. Chapter 14. If it's good enough for tadpoles, it's good enough for you. I'm trying to tie all of this in. I mean, yeah, be honest with you, I'm getting tired of this camping trip. That's what the issue is. So I'm just kind of like flipping through. So we are reading chapters in part 2. And there's 2 more chapters to read before I get to part 3. So let's get through this camping trip. Come on, Kerri. Get to the good stuff. Day 5, Monument Creek. How much longer do you think we could wait? I asked Dad, who was poking around last night's campsite. Don't know. Guess we better get moving. Have our longest hike of the trip ahead of us, he replied. We were stalling, both hoping Brian was the person behind the flashlight the night before, both hoping he would come walking into camp any moment. Whatever odds Dad and I were at yesterday had been forgiven with a solid night of rest and a growing concern for my brother. Maybe Brian would meet us back at the rim tomorrow. AD left a while ago asking if it would be okay for him to hike on with the small group he met yesterday. Dad agreed and said we'd meet him at Horn Creek, our campsite for the night, 8 miles east. Dad and I finally decided we couldn't wait any longer due to the rising heat and headed out after topping off our bottles. We needed to be careful with our water supply today. There was no reliable water till Indian Garden tomorrow. Dad's trail guide said not to count on water at Cedar Spring and not to drink it at Salt Creek due to mineralization, or at Horn Creek due to radiation from an old mine above it. Fantastic. The switchbacks out of Monument Creek were steep and taxing, but the trail soon leveled off. We would be broadly contouring around and through the 3 steep drainages today. Other times we would be jutting up against 1,000-foot drop-offs. The trail cut between the river and massive red buttes rising off the distant south rim, weaving through dense brown sagebrush and endless cacti. It was as if we had been dropped into an old Western movie, and now all we needed was some proper hats and a pair of painted horses. I'd even settle for a stubborn burro, I thought. My pack was no longer a burden. It had grown much lighter thanks to a chubby rodent and my own consumption. I felt like a different person from the one who'd begun this trip 5 days before. My legs held strong and I was no longer fearful for myself, but I was growing more worried about Brian. If he was behind us, he would have an immense distance to cover. We shouldn't have ever told him to come down on his own and meet us. There was no shade, and the sun was already striking us hard by mid-morning. The distance we needed to cover in the heat was going to be the battle today. Dad pointed out a large group of vultures riding the thermals and circling on the north side, joking maybe a hiker had fallen. I didn't think it was funny. About a mile down the trail, Dad said he needed a bathroom break and went back behind a ridge. He was gone for what felt like an eternity, and I was left stewing, stuck in the middle of the forsaken nowhere, waiting on what he could have taken care of back in our shaded camp. When Dad finally came back, he sat down, pale and discouraged, his face turned down. Just leave me here to die. I'd never seen my dad so lost. You need to drink more water? Come on, we can't stop here. We'll roast. We need to find some shade. Cedar Spring, can you make it there? Resigned, he stood up gingerly, looked me in the eye with more clarity and said, "Yeah, I can do it." I helped him put his pack on, feeling bad about what I was asking him to do. We set out with a short third of a mile to go to get to a stopping point. We were both quiet. It felt like an immense shift had happened between us. He'd rallied me for the first few days, keeping me moving, keeping me alive. Now I was doing the same thing. Dad never ever showed weakness. He was the toughest person I knew, so it scared me to see him sink so low. 11 a.m., Cedar Spring. We dropped down into a chalky, narrow drainage, hoping to find water to fill our bottles back up, but all we found was a tiny water hole with black tadpoles swimming in it. I figured if life was able to live in the water, then it couldn't be that bad. So we set to work, filtering part of what was sustaining the spawn. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Dad was wiped out, and I was suddenly tired, feeling oddly weighed down as if someone had placed a heavy, warm blanket on me. I decided to hole up there for a few hours, setting plastic and our mats down under small rock alcoves. We took off our boots and settled in for a rest, with a bag of snacks and my book near me. Around 1 o'clock, Dad woke me up to tell me with a chuckle that a raven had stolen my bag of snacks, scattering food all over the creek bed, and was now munching happily. In my bare feet, I went after the bird. It took off, flying low over a steep drop-off, landing far out of my reach. It looked mighty pleased with itself. I was able to salvage some unpecked, wrapped items the thief left behind. I wasn't going to waste anything down here if I could help it. Dad thought we should pack up and head on, but something in me was telling me to wait. Shouldn't we stay here, though? The worst of the heat Shouldn't we stay here through the worst of the heat and go on near dusk? If we do that, we're going to get stuck with no campsite and too far to travel tomorrow. I really think we should stay a few more hours at least. It's so awfully hot on the trail. Dad decided we could stay, and we went back to lounging, chatting off and on, our voices bouncing around the creek bed. "Help! Help!" a man's voice shouted overhead. I sat up and hastily put my boots on, not tying my laces. "Where are you? Are you hurt?" I called. "No, bring water." I knew that voice. "Brian? Kerri? Dad?" His voice echoed. I could tell which side of the creek bed he was on. "It's us. Where are you? I'm coming. Dad and I are coming. Keep talking. Tell me where you are." I was seized with fear and adrenaline. I could tell from Brian's voice he was in bad shape, scared. I grabbed my first aid kit and water bottles and ran fast as I could right past Dad, who was still working on his boots. Slow down. We don't need you getting hurt. Brian was likely on the path we had come down, and I raced up it, finding him quickly. He was sitting down with his pack on, planted directly above our heads. He was bent over like he had come to the end of all ability. Thank you, God. Oh, thank you, thank you. He was exhausted, dehydrated, sunburned, but otherwise seemed okay. I hugged him and handed him my water as Dad came up right behind me on the path. Dad hugged him tightly, holding on for a while, and the three of us cried, so happy to be reunited. We need to get you in the shade. Can you make it down the path? We've got water and food and a place to rest. I was speaking rapidly. Yeah, I can get down there, but something is wrong with my eyes. Can't see very well, my brother said. We took off my brother's pack, and Dad helped lift Brian up. Dad reached out and held Brian's belt from behind as Brian took a few steps forward. I grabbed his green pack and almost threw it. It was so light. Where's your gear? Chucked it. Almost all of it, too heavy, couldn't go on any further. Tossed my tent, sleeping bag, clothes, back away. All I've got is some food and water, but my water is contaminated. I didn't want to drink it, was afraid it would make me sick. That's okay, we've got plenty. Dad and I encouraged him down the trail and laid him on Dad's mat. I sat down close to him, making sure he was drinking, and we wet a bandana, putting it over his head. We also washed his eyes out with water. He didn't have any sunglasses, and he seemed to have sunburned his eyes, telling us his eyes felt gritty and painful. This is supposed to be fun? I mean, I don't find fun in activities where so many things can happen or possibly go wrong. How you sunburn your eyes? Dad took Brian's water bottles that held the contaminated water from Monument Creek and filtered it into clean bottles. It wasn't the most sanitary way to go about it, but we needed water for 3 now. Brian told us he rested for 2 days and hiked along the rim trail on the 3rd day to build some strength. He'd taken a bus to the head of Hermit yesterday morning and hiked all day, knowing on day 4 we would be at Monument. He told us how hairy Hermit was and how worried he was about us. And when he came across the sandal on the sign at the fork, he thought it was my shoe and was frightened, afraid something had happened to me. Brian told us I kept going as far as I could. 9 miles. He hiked in 1 day what had taken us 2.5 with sleep and decent food. He stopped last night above the drop to Monument Creek and shone his flashlight around for a few minutes, but couldn't make out the trail. My heart caught in my chest. We saw a light, I said with my head down, ashamed we didn't go to help. I decided to stay where I was. I propped myself up against a rock, slept that way. At one point, a small rattler came by. I killed it with a rock, and just in case, I cut it in 2 with my knife. I was terrified the entire night. That shit ain't fun. A sharp sting was filling my guts. Brian alone all night up there terrified, and we hadn't done anything. When I got to Monument this morning, I was glad to see water, but then I wasn't sure if I should drink it. I took a wrong turn, went south for a while toward the rim, up a drainage. Couldn't find the trail, got turned around, lost. Everything looks the same. And finally found a way up and out and told myself to keep going. Got here heard voices, so I yelled, "We're so glad you're okay." And we proceeded to tell him about the last 4 insane days. Yeah, I don't know. This ain't fun. It don't sound like fun to me. Chapter 15, Coming Back from the Abyss Doesn't Have to Be So Dramatic. 6 p.m., Salt Creek. Late in the afternoon, we decided we should move on after letting Brian rest for a few hours. I was surprised he was able to go on, but he seemed stronger than we'd initially thought. By 6 o'clock, the three of us were descending along the pink and white streaked ridges of Salt Creek after passing by the Alligator and the Inferno, names for butts that rose below the rim. We had hiked 2 miles since leaving Cedar Spring and were making good time considering the current state of our hiking party. Having Brian back raised my spirits. I no longer noticed the heat or the distance. I was learning to make larger strides with my head up, to take in what was in front of me instead of fretting over my foot placement. I was learning to trust myself and the worn path under my boots. And even though it didn't look not possible to go forward, the trail always led around the gaping expanses. It stayed steady, constant. The trail never fought against the terrain, but went with it, alongside it, in tandem. As our light began to fade, Brian told us again he couldn't see very well. He stayed as close as we could to him, Dad calling out to what was coming next while I walked behind Brian to help with light. The three of us hiked for hours using our mag lights, continually checking on each other, encouraging each other to keep going, boot by boot, foot by foot. We crossed 5 more miles of the vast platform after leaving Salt. Through sure, stubborn willpower and internal strength, the three of us made it to camp. What would have happened if Dad and I hadn't stopped at Cedar? Would Brian have been able to get down to shade? Would he have been able to cover this distance on his own? Brian could have died if he hadn't made it to us. I wasn't just tired at Cedar earlier. It was as if I had been burdened to stay longer, an internal feeling to stay put. Was that you, God? Uh, yeah, dummy. 10 p.m., Horn Creek. By the grace of God, we found our way into camp at Horn Creek in the pitch black sometime around 10 o'clock, our lights bouncing around the barren campsite. No tents, no AD. We hoped that meant that he had gone on toward Indian Garden. Even though the camp was bare, Dad sought out our assigned spot, marked with a letter and a number on a wooden sign. Brian needed shelter, so I set up my one man for him, and Dad cooked us a packet of food. Brian, or cross, Brian ate cross-legged in the tent. Right after he ate, he camped out. Dad and I laid down our ground cloth again, covered in fine red dust, and slept outside under the stars for the last night. Day 6. We set out early from Horn, facing 7.5 miles and an ascent of 3,000 feet, hoping to reach the rim by nightfall. As we meandered east, the early morning light was hitting the pink expanses of Battleship. Dad had said we would be coming up on it on this day, and by dang, we were. Felt good getting this far. As we rounded an edge, my worn down boot caught on a rock. Aw, heck! Ankle went. I sat down, hesitantly removed my boot with a grimace, and Dad looked over my foot. We decided the best course was to wrap it with a bandage and keep moving. I put my boot back on and laced it up, standing up slowly. It held my weight. 11 a.m., Indian Garden, Bright Angel Trail. We made it to Indian Garden mid-morning. My ankle was sore, but I was managing with a bit of a hobble. A surreal scene greeted us after our week in the great empty beyond. Water, huts, trees, and people. Gobs of them milling around, most looking much cleaner and put together than us, and some of them now staring at us. I looked down at myself. My legs were caked in red, sandy dirt, and by the looks on people's faces, I might have been covered all the way to my head. We made our way over to the water pump, and a few folks stepped out of our way, letting us cut in front of them. Do we look that bad? After filling our bottles and chugging down a good amount of cool, fresh water, we set off for some shade. A park ranger saw us, asked how we were, and wondered where we had come from. Dad dug out our permit, but the ranger didn't ask to see it. I wanted to give this guy a piece of my mind. Rock slides, cliffs, trails without water. But the three of us were polite. Something about talking to someone in uniform and official hat. Dad settled in under some trees, deciding to make himself some ramen noodles for an early lunch. But we still had 5 miles and 3,000 feet to go. I didn't want to stop. Since there are so many people here and Bright Angel looks like a highway, folks coming down and going up, could Brian and I go on ahead and meet you at the top? Dad said okay, and Brian and I set out, knowing even with my bum ankle and his exhaustion, we could make quicker time than Dad, who was still weighted down with a substantial pack. If you carried in, you carry it out. From Indian Garden, you can see the rim, but you can't make out the whole trail. I knew it was up there, though. 5 miles and 3,000 feet to a hot shower and decent food. We've got this, no problem. 4 p.m., mile and a half rest house. Around 5 hours and 2-hour climb, and with a good stop at the rest house, we had made it up 2,000 feet of winding switchbacks. Even though we were ascending the whole time, red smooth, Bright Angel was a dream after rocky, scary Hermit and taxing Tonto. It was wide, which was good because people were often passing us coming down as we climbed up. I was surprised this late in the day to see day hikers still headed down carrying little. I doubted they understood how long it could take to get back up. Brian's vision had improved, and even with my bum ankle, it was a good day. A quiet one, side by side with him, talking off and on, encouraging each other. Occasionally, one of us would lag, and the other would just stop and yell back down the trail, "Come on, it's only 20 more steps up to here." It wasn't far between stretches, and turn after turn, we had almost made it. Near a mile to go, we began to think of all the food we can eat back in the normal world. Taco Bell, McDonald's, Arby's. We were talking our way through menus as we climbed. More and more, we passed signs of civilization, ice cream cones, flat pavement, indoor plumbing, a sturdy metal railing to keep you from going over the edge. Where was that when I needed it 6 days ago? My tattered right boot hit the first blessed step of the man-made walkway. A knock straight down from the heavens hit me on my head. And before my sturdy left boot set down, God said, "Hey, we had a deal. I have held up my end. Now it's your turn." Floored, I halted in my tracks. "Seriously? Right now? You're doing this right now?" "Yes." Resigned, I accepted my fate. Okay, all right, all right. You've got me. 6 p.m. South Rim, 30 miles height. We made it out of the beast and ran into AD, who was waiting nearby. He had a big grin on his face, clean clothes on, and looked much better off than we did. He'd gone on from Horn last evening after realizing it was barren and the water wasn't safe, spending the night in Indian Creek. He climbed out earlier today, rode a bus down to the van, and checked into our room, which wasn't far. AD said he would wait for Dad. Brian and I should go on to the hotel. Inside our room, I called Mom in Phoenix and filled her in on one heck of a story, skirting around the worst of it. Then I got in the shower. I won't ever forget seeing red dirt and sand wash down my legs and pile near the drain while I stood in the water. After putting on clean clothes, I headed back to the rim, and around 7:30 p.m., I got to watch Dad coming up the last leg. He was tired, but happy to see us and the end of the trail. We ended up eating late dinner that night at a fancy restaurant overlooking the rim. While waiting for our table, the bartender served us pineapple juice in chilled glasses, and we all slugged them back like we were drinking the finest liquor to be found. And when we got to our table, the waiter asked what he could do for us, and we told him to keep the water coming. The four of us sat around our table that night with huge grins on our faces, stuffing ourselves full. Dad didn't even look at the bill, just handed the waiter his credit card. That night, I fell asleep on the floor, tucked into my sleeping bag, marveling at the carpet and air conditioning, already missing the Milky Way. All right. What did I just read? I started at 13 and I read 14 and 15. I guess it's about midnight. So I will stop. We will be moving in to part 3 at the next one, and it's titled Love Will Never Fail You. Love knows no limit to its endurance, no end to its trust, no fading of its hope. It can outlast anything. It is, in fact, the one thing that still stands when all else has fallen. That's 1 Corinthians 13, 7 through 8. All right. Thank you, one person, for tuning in. I hope you have enjoyed this reading. But I've been reading for hours now. And as much as I want to move on and read, I am a little bit pooped by now. I'm tired. But once again, thank you. And I will be back to read again tomorrow. And I will start with A Serial Killer's Daughter. And I'll read quite a few chapters, and then I'll go back to the other Madam Whip-Ass channel and continue reading the kept ones, the Barge, the Fame Years. All right. Thank you, one person. And before I go, do you care to come in the chat and say hello? I know there's so I'll wait about 2 minutes. But come in the chat and say hello. I don't know how far you're listening in the stream. You could be way back, for all I know. But if you do hear this, leave a comment in the comment section of this video and say hello. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate you much. Peace.